Jay Bilas, of course, the face of college basketball with ESPN, will be in Baton Rouge tonight, and he's joining us here on Off the Bench. Jay, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing good. I wonder, when you come down to these little small SEC towns, do you kind of get out and experience them, or you stay in your hotel room and get ready for the game all day?
No, I get out. I was out all yesterday, went to practice, and, did the whole Baton Rouge thing.
When you get out and you talk to Will Wade and this LSU basketball team after what they went through last season, what do you kind of gauge the feel around the program after what they experienced last season with the success and all the off-court stuff to where they are right now?
Well, we didn't really talk about last season. It was more about this year, and they've got a good team. They've got really dynamic playmakers in the backcourt. They rebound well. I think they're still trying to search for, the right defensive mindset to, guard the three a little better and, guard the ball a little bit better. But this is a very formidable team, and in a season where nobody's maybe overpowering, I'd say. I don't want to say nobody's great, but nobody's overpowering. We've still got teams with gaudy records and have been really consistent. But I don't think there's anybody out there that's overwhelming with talent, and they can beat anybody. So this is a good year to be healthy at the end, and it's a good year to be good.
People who watch this team up close from a local level look at the depth and say that's been the issues after reeling off 8 straight wins in the SEC to struggling at Vanderbilt, Auburn, and then at Alabama on Saturday. When you see LSU's deficiencies, is it the depth that's kind of leading the conversation?
No, I don't think depth is that big of an issue in college basketball. There are a lot of teams that win big with 7 guys. It's more, you rattled off some teams they've played. They're all on the road, and a lot of teams have lost on the road. And it's not like they lost big at Auburn and lost big at Alabama. Those were 1 or 2 possession games, and so you wind up. And Auburn was a game they kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, gave away, and once they'd won, I thought so. They've had really good opportunities. They've won some really good games, and they've got another great opportunity against Kentucky at home. But even if LSU or Kentucky, whatever, they lose a game here or there, you're not disqualified. This isn't football, and you wind up in the tournament this year, and the LSU's a tournament team, so is Kentucky. You've got a great opportunity to win.
And look, all focus will be on the tournament pretty soon here. But before that, there is an SEC regular season championship to be decided. LSU wins it last year. Is it exaggeration when you look at just how the standings sit right now? Is it exaggeration to say that their hopes of repeating as regular season champ are on the line tonight?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's probably true. That if you want to win, they're a game behind Kentucky. You fall 2 games behind with 4 or 5 left.
Yeah,
that's a problem. But again, winning the regular season is a good thing. Winning the tournament's a good thing. But if they won them both last year, or they won the regular season last year and lost in the Sweet 16, and nobody was thrilled to death with it. You'd rather win at the very end, and these things are all great things. But you'd rather win the big prize at the end.
So then going into a tournament setting, because as you said, and it's right here on your rankings that you do on ESPN.com as well, you are pretty high on the Tigers. What makes them dangerous in a tournament setting?
They can score. They can really score. And when you can score to that level, and they consistently get to the free throw line, and the free throw line is it's the one place on the basketball floor that you can score with no defense, and they get there and they make a high percentage of them. So does Kentucky, by the way, but LSU gets there a little bit more. So these are 2 teams that put a lot of pressure on the defense that can score from the line. And now do they need to defend better? They do. But when you're talking about Auburn and lose to Alabama, Alabama launches up a ton of threes, and they've beaten good teams. So it's not like they lost to some schlep somewhere. They're Alabama's good. So I'm not too worried about it, but there's a long way to go. And the teams that get better from now until the start of the NCAA tournament are the ones that are going to be in best position, because there's no rule that says you can't get better from here on out. The teams that have won it in the past have used this time to get better.
So when you look at the game, you look at the matchup, you kind of touched on it a bit, both of them being great free throw shooting teams. Do you have a deciding factor that maybe jumps out when it comes to LSU, Kentucky specifically tonight in the PMAC?
Well, if you want to beat Kentucky, you got to do three things. You have to take them out of transition, because they score about a third of their points in transition. You have to keep those three playmakers they've got in front of you. You can't get broken down off the dribble and can't put them on the free throw line. And you have to rebound, because they're a very good rebounding team. I happen to think that LSU is a good rebounding team too. But when two good rebounding teams play against one another, it's not like they wind up going 50-50.
Yeah.
One team usually wins out. And so you have to win that rebound battle. And oftentimes, if you force a team into half court, you're going to have a much better opportunity to grab rebounds. And, the one thing, like when you mentioned before about Alabama, one of the difficult things about rebounding against Alabama is there's so many long rebounds. That's not going to be the case against Kentucky. They don't shoot as many threes. So the battle's going to be around the basket, which I think LSU is in a little bit better position to win.
Talking to Jay Bilas here on Off the Bench, and Jay, this probably doesn't have as much weight behind it this week as it did like a week and a half ago, but when you look at this LSU team, really throughout Wade's tenure, they really excel at the end of games, and he's always talking about this idea of the 6-minute game and what it takes to win when it matters most. Have you heard Wade talk about that 6-minute game? Like, as a basketball mind yourself, what's your reaction to kind of his philosophy?
I haven't heard about the 6-minute game, but most coaches emphasize the end of the game, because that's when teams are in foul trouble. That's when teams are tired, and that's when things seem to count more. So, if you have to be able to finish at the end in order to win. So, I'm sure the 6-minute thing makes great sense and makes great sense to the players. But there aren't a lot of coaches out there that say, hey, don't worry about the end. The end's not that important.
Jay Bilas, who will be on the call tonight for LSU Kentucky, 8 o'clock tip time on ESPN. Jay, you were in the Breslin Center for Michigan State last weekend when Maryland went in there and beat the Spartans. You were tweeting about San Diego State last night, who's the lone undefeated team in college basketball. We've seen teams like Dayton and Gonzaga have really successful seasons. This year feels really wide open, and it doesn't have that name brand at the top. I know Kansas is there. What's your overall view of this season and how wide open it feels at this point going into March?
Well, it feels wide open because we've got a lot of blue bloods that haven't been as good. North Carolina's not as good. Indiana's not as good. So there are a bunch of teams we expected to be better that aren't very good. So it feels different. Baylor's really good. They've only lost one time. I think the difference this year is we don't have a team that's got overwhelming talent. We've got teams that have been very good at times, and then teams that have been the teams at the top of the polls have been the ones that have been the most consistent. But they're not unbeatable, and they're not going to out-talent you in every game. They've just been really, really consistent. And Baylor's at the top of that list. I mean, I was actually at the game that they lost in Alaska. They got beat by Washington, and when Washington was full strength at the time. But Baylor's they're older and they're consistent. Defensively, they rebound, and they can absorb a bad shooting night because of that. Other teams have not been able to do that as well. But I'm not a believer that anybody can win. I do think anybody can lose. Like you can get beat on a given night. But when somebody says, well, anybody can win on a given night, then the next question is, all right, well, how many given nights have you had then? And then you start talking about the ones that have had a lot of given nights. Well, they've separated. I think Baylor, Kansas, you mentioned Gonzaga and San Diego State, and some of those teams they've separated themselves. Duke is up there. I think Maryland is starting to. They're good enough to do that, but they haven't been quite as consistent. But those are the teams I think that have stood out.
I couldn't wait to see your reaction, and I tuned in to College Game Day after Mark Emmert and Bob Bowlesby went up to Capitol Hill on the name, image, and likeness legislation. and we're pretty much laughed out of the room by senators and Congress. For our listening audience, what did you make of that? And I know it's a wide open question, but the future of the game and how it sits today.
Well, I thought the NCAA representatives made fools of themselves on Capitol Hill. That when you're going before Congress to say, "Hey, we're unwilling to do our jobs, and we'd like you to do our jobs for us by giving us an antitrust exemption to do what we've been doing the last 120 years," clearly is working, and clearly lawmakers around the country don't like it and want it changed. I think that's a pretty lame position to take before Congress, especially when they offered up no solution of their own and no framework for it. I can't imagine that Congress is going to take that up and give the fox the key to the hen house, if you will. But, you've been fooled by things before. To me, what the NCAA is saying is utter nonsense. The idea that you cannot allow name, image, and likeness rights because it would make the players employees. I mean, that's a lie. It would not make them employees. It's absurd. And then the idea that you can't have 50 different, state laws and operate fair competition, which is also absurd. They have 50 different tax laws, 50 different laws on transportation, and, employment and labor and all these different things. They put these games on just fine. And they could change all this tomorrow if the Board of Governors said, all right, here's what California allows. Everybody can allow at least that, and more if you want to. It's not a problem. This is easy. Name, image, and likeness is what every person in our country is allowed, including every non-athlete student. And the idea somehow that it wouldn't work for athletes when it works for every other student, whether on scholarship or not, is laughable. And if an individual school wants to disallow it and wants their, like BYU doesn't allow caffeine, that's fine. They can disallow whatever they want at an individual school. But you can't have a blanket rule where all schools get together like a cartel and say, here's what it's going to be. And, the NCAA did not go to Congress and say, hey, we need help because it is anti-competitive for every school to spend whatever they want on facilities, and to spend whatever they want on coaching staffs, and to spend whatever they want on travel, and to spend whatever they want in what they feed the players and how they house them. And, they didn't ask for any accommodation except for we've got to keep the players at zero. And that's an absurdity that is hard to even fathom that they could say that out loud without people laughing in their face.
You're a great historian of the game as well. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf will have his number retired on the next home game that LSU plays on February 29th. He played as Chris Jackson here at LSU in the late 80s and early 90s. What do you remember about him? For me, he's my favorite LSU athlete of all time because I was a kid growing up watching him play. As a historian of the game, what do you remember about him?
You didn't have to be a historian. I was there. I saw him play. I saw him play in person at LSU in the Maravich Center. I mean, he was a great player and near unstoppable. And those Dale Brown teams were fantastic and so much fun to watch and formidable. And so he was not only a great player in college that was, you couldn't devise a defense to stop him, and then went into the NBA and was exactly the same. Heck, he can even play right now. Yeah. You put him out on the floor, he'd be the best guard. He'd be the best guard on the floor now.
Yeah, LSU could use him. They could use a point guard for sure. Jay, have a great
call
tonight.
Everybody could use him.
Yeah, have a great call tonight. Thank you for the time this morning. Enjoy Baton Rouge.
Thank you. You too.
Yes, sir. There he is, Jay Bilas, checking in with us.